Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to review the Rythmik L12 Direct Servo Subwoofer. I got a call from a buddy recently and he had bought a pair of these and he was willing to let me borrow one so I could make this video. Special thank you for that. I'll be honest, when he told me he had a pair of Rythmik subwoofers, I was really hoping he was going to say he had the F12 because I've had my eye on that one for a while and I've never heard it. But he didn't. He had the L12, which is kind of like the cheaper brother, if you will. So I called Rythmik right away because I wanted to know a little bit about this subwoofer, kind of from the horse's mouth, like where did this come from? Why do they make it, basically, right? And what they told me was a little bit impressive because they said the F12, which is about $1,000, is kind of like their standard baseline subwoofer, and they didn't actually have any plans to make a more affordable version. The reason they made this subwoofer is because a lot of their customers continuously asked for a more affordable subwoofer that had the same deep bass low frequency extension as their more expensive subwoofers. And as you would imagine, that's probably fairly challenging to make a subwoofer that digs just as deep, plays just as low for a cheaper price, but here we go. They were able to do it. So I'll tell you about its specs, some pros and cons, a little market context. I'll compare it to a few other subwoofers. I'll tell you how it sounds, then we're gonna wrap this up, okay? So what we've got is a 12-inch paper cone, a 300-watt RMS Class D Hypex servo-controlled amplifier. The frequency adjustment is a little bit interesting because they give a few different measurements. On the back of this amp, there are 3 bass roll-off settings: music low, home theater option, and I believe a high option as well. I don't know if it's music high or home theater high. Anyway, I used the music low option with line in, and they say that has a -3 dB point of 18 hertz to 100 hertz. Note, -3 dB is just a little bit of a tighter tolerance than the plus or minus 3 dB measurement. The plus or minus 3 dB measurement for this goes down to 14 hertz, which is rather impressive. We have 2 slope options, 12 and 24. The frequency adjustment knob lets you go between 30 hertz and 120 hertz. Its height, width, and depth are 14 inches by 14 inches by 15.5. Keep in mind that 15.5 depth, that includes the grill and control knobs on the back. Moving on, what do we have here? So its weight, guys, this is a hefty 58 pounds. And the reason that's so impressive is because that is 20 pounds heavier than the SVS SB2000 Pro and 20 pounds heavier than the REL HT1205. So for my friends that are interested in like build quality and things like that, this has very, very good build quality. It is honestly built like a tank. So it comes in black oak, matte black, gloss white, and costs $559. I'm gonna say that's a hell of a deal. You could buy a pair of them with a 5% discount. I think it comes out to around $1,060. Anyways, market context was a little bit challenging because at $560, it's a bit of an odd price. With its features and specs, I couldn't really find a lot. When I look for market context, I try to find stuff that's fairly similar, same design, similar output, stuff like that. I couldn't find much, really just the SVS SB1000. That is a 12-inch driver. It's a sealed cabinet, 300 watts RMS. The only main difference is that doesn't look to go as low in its frequency. Its plus or minus 3 dB point was 24 hertz. Other subs around, if we expand between 400 and 600, then we have a few more options, of course. But the designs are pretty different. Like the Polk HTS12, for example, it's like $450, but it's a ported sub. We have the RSL Speedwoofer at $400. That's supposed to be pretty good, but that's another ported sub. So, if you know any market context, leave it in the notes. I didn't really find a lot. Moving on. Pros and cons. So, pros, excellent sound quality paired with good output. That was a big pro I listed, and the reason I say that is because at this price point, usually you're getting good output, at least from the reputable brands, right? You're getting a lot of output typically, or as much output as you can get for the money. You're usually not getting really, really good sound quality paired with that. And if you are, like in the case of the Bowers & Wilkins ASW608, that's got amazing sound quality for $500, unfortunately, it's just an 8-inch driver with about 100 watts, so it can't play very loud. It seems like you usually get one or the other at this price point. Now, I'm not saying the other subwoofers that can play loud, like the SVS SB1000, sound like crap. That's absolutely not the case. Most of the subwoofers from reputable brands sound fairly good. But in comparison, the sound quality on this is more like the Bowers & Wilkins ASW608, which is tonally very pleasing, very accurate, very articulate, and very, very good, honestly, at any price point. Moving on, another pro I listed was its deep bass low frequency extension. For its size, and even size aside, it digs really, really deep. The bass is very impactful and it extends very, very low. I was a bit surprised when I talked to Brian over at Rythmik and he said this had the same low frequency, deep bass output as their larger models. I thought, you know, at the price and the size, that's like kind of doesn't make sense, but he wasn't lying. Like, it really extends very, very low. I mean, this, as far as the subs I own, like I own the SVS SB3000 and the Rel HT1205. This extends lower than those two subwoofers, honestly. Now, listen, I'm not saying it's better than those two subwoofers overall, because those subwoofers are more expensive. They have a lot more power and a lot more maximum output. What I'm saying, though, is that reasonable listening levels around 80 decibels. The bass from the L12 was deeper and it extended a little bit lower. Moving on here, the small form factor I listed as a pro. I think that's something a lot of people look at. You know what I mean? I would love to have like huge subwoofers like the SVS, you know, PB16 Ultra. Like, they're so cool, but they're so big and a lot of rooms can't accommodate them, even though I don't have to worry about wife acceptance factor because I'm not married. And even if I was, I wouldn't care, honestly, but that's probably why I'm not married. Anyway, I can't have a huge subwoofer in my room. It just wouldn't look aesthetically pleasing to my eyeballs, and that's a huge part of the hobby for me. Love the size of this thing. Next, I put excellent articulation in the low bass and mid bass regions. This thing's a sound quality champion, honestly, kind of from top to bottom. I've heard some subwoofers that are, you know, they have good articulation in the mid bass, but they don't extend very low. And if they don't extend very low, you know, it doesn't, you know, there's not going to be any detail down there either then. This has good detail from top to bottom, so hats off there, honestly. This is kind of like one of those things, like when I reviewed the Rel HT1205, I was like, I'm surprised Rel made this. It's like too good for the money. That's how I feel about this thing. I'm surprised Rythmik made it. It's honest. It's like, it really is too good for the money. All right, I'm trying to reel it in here and be more objective. Sorry. Look, this is my channel. I'm going to be a little subjective from time to time. This is just my personal opinion. I really like this subwoofer. I'll be honest, if my friend who owns it, who bought the pair, if he is like, hey, you want to buy these? I'm totally buying them. I totally will. I love them. Cons, setup is critical. And you know, setup is critical for all subwoofers, but especially for this one. Initially, I had it set up improperly. I didn't have the phase right, I didn't have the gain right, I didn't have it in the ideal position, and it sounded slow and sloppy and really, really crappy, honestly. So the reason I mention that is because if you own this subwoofer or bought this subwoofer and what I'm saying as far as its listening impressions don't line up with your experience, if you're like, what do you mean? This thing sounds sloppy to me. You probably have it set up wrong, spend some time with it, get it right. It's a fairly tight sounding subwoofer. That's how it should sound, at least. Another con I listed, there's no gloss black option. I love gloss black, I really do. The black oak that I have here is actually very convincing and it looks somewhat like a real wood veneer, if I'm being completely honest, even from this distance. But I'm a sucker for shiny stuff. I love shiny stuff, I really do. Let's talk about its sound next. Output. I would say it has class-leading output at this price. And the reason is, for $500 or $560, having 300 watts RMS and a 12-inch driver, the only other sub with that spec was the SVS SB1000, which is, I'll be honest, you know, SVS makes class-leading subs also, you know. So I can only find two subs that were, you know, about 500 bucks with this much power. So hats off there. And I know you guys keep bringing up the RSL Speedwoofer. I don't have one here. I know that one has a lot of power too. I don't have one here though. I haven't heard one yet. And it is a 10-inch ported driver, so I don't know if people are going to cross-shop that. I'm supposed to get a review sample sometime in February. We'll talk about that one later, okay? But output, very, very good for the money. Bass detail, we can also call this articulation. I will say it's excellent regardless of the price. If this was a $1,000 subwoofer with this level of bass detail, I would be happy. Great bass detail. Speed, very good, yet natural sounding. And when I'm talking about speed, I'm talking about how tight it is. Does it start and stop when it's supposed to and things like that. It definitely starts and stops when it's supposed to. But tightness is one of those things like output. People like different amounts. Is it the tightest subwoofer I've heard in my whole life? No. Is it loose and sloppy? Absolutely not. I would say it's as tight as it should be to sound natural and tonally accurate. Moving on to extension, again, excellent at any price. Do keep in mind though, it only has 300 watts. So Yes, it plays very deep and very low frequency bass, but if you like to listen at 95 plus decibels, for example, or you're trying to replicate reference level theater like environment in your living room, you're going to need a pair at minimum, I would say, or possibly you might even have to upgrade to the F12. I listen around 80 decibels. But again, for my listening impressions, excellent extension. Next, we're going to talk about accuracy. That's the last metric. It used to be authority. I've changed it to accuracy. And the reason is if it has good output, which we talk about, and good speed, which we already talk about, then it's a given that it's going to have good authority, right? So we don't need to talk about authority as well, but accuracy is fairly important. Accuracy is not the same as speed. When I say accuracy, I mean throughout its frequency range, does it sound the way it's supposed to tonally? And does it give you the quantity of bass that is correct and appropriate throughout its frequency range? Some subwoofers might give you a lot at around 50 hertz and then nothing at 30, for example. This doesn't do that. From top to bottom, it gives you the correct amount of output. It's never oversaturated in one area or not giving enough where it should, down low, and it's tonally harmonious and accurate. Let's move on here. Other impressions, excellent integration. Room placement does matter quite a lot for this subwoofer. It will disappear in the room, sound tight, quick, with deep bass and excellent extension when set up properly. Now, some comparisons. First, I'll tell you how it compares to the REL HT1205. That's a subwoofer I own and love very much. In fairness, the REL HT1205 has 200 watts more and is $150 more expensive. So everything I say here, consider the REL can play louder, has more maximum output, and to justify its slightly higher price. So the Rythmik L12 actually has a little bit more deep bass output and a little bit more low frequency extension. However, in fairness, the REL has more power, so it can play its low frequencies a lot louder. The REL is a touch tighter sounding, but the Rythmik is a touch deeper sounding. This is one of those, like, it's a small difference though, honestly, again. And bass detail was excellent on both. Granted, the Rythmik was able to play some details better than the REL, but the REL was able to play other details slightly better than the Rythmik. These two subs are a little bit more similar than different in my opinion, and I'll be honest, if someone's comparing the two, they should just buy based on power requirements because they're both really, really good. They both articulate well. They both have good accuracy and good speed. They're just slightly different here and there. And ultimately, I would say if 300 watts is enough for you, get this bad boy. If you think you're going to need more power, the REL's a great option also. Again, I own that. I love that subwoofer. Let's talk about versus the SVS SB2000 Pro. That's a little bit more expensive. That's a $800 subwoofer, I believe, and this is $560. That gives you even more power, having 550 watts. So again, it can play louder at its maximum. But again, this is going to have a little bit deeper bass and a little bit lower frequency extension. However, having less power, that means the SVS SB2000 Pro can play its lower frequencies at even louder volumes. But again, for my listening impressions at around 80 dB, this extended lower and had deeper bass output. Its articulation was actually quite a bit better than the SVS SB2000 Pro. Speed, I would say they're about the same. The SVS SB2000 Pro is what I would consider a quick sub, and they're about even there. But this took the edge in bass detail. The SVS SB2000 Pro is going to have a little bit more dynamic slam to it. And you're going to have a lot more features, costing a lot more. You got the cell phone app and all those fine-grained controls, and you do get a gloss black finish option. At the end of the day, though, this is what I'm going to tell you about this subwoofer. For $560 and a pair for just over $1,000, quite the bargain. Quite the bargain, honestly. This is it's a really good subwoofer. It has really wet my palate, if you will, for the Rythmik brand. I am very, very curious to hear their other subwoofers. Rythmik, if you're watching, send me an F12, please. I would love to hear one. They probably won't. Honestly, my channel is really small, and it probably isn't good use of their marketing dollars. In fairness, maybe I'll nut up and just fucking buy one for myself. Anyway, if you have any questions, ask them in the comments below. Sorry I got a little bit subjective here. This is just one of those situations where, for the price and the performance, the low frequency extension, and the bass articulation, I just feel like this sub delivers more than it should. the way I look at things in terms of value are, I think most products are fair products, meaning you're getting what you're paying for, right? Toyota Camry example, I've given this example many times. When you buy a Toyota Camry, you get exactly what you're paying for. You get good quality, it's a fair price, it's not too expensive, it's not very cheap either, you know? It's a fair deal, right? But then there's like other situations where you pay money and the quality is not that good on the product. That's considered a bad deal. And then more rare is you pay money and you get way better than you were expecting. That's not too common. I love it when that happens. You know what I mean? The only other example I could think of that in recent memory is the Kinky Studio preamp and monoblock amps I have. For their price, they punch like a crazy amount above their weight. And I feel like in terms of sound quality, this subwoofer really does punch way beyond its weight. When I heard the Bowers & Wilkins ASW 608, and in its review, if you guys go back and watch that, or if you've seen it before, you'll hear I loved that subwoofer tonally. It was amazing. I just wish it had more output. So for those of you that saw that video and were like, hey, that sounds great, I just wish it had more power and just more grunt to it for the price, this thing's only 60 bucks more than that. It's got about triple the power, I'm guessing. The driver is quite a bit larger at being 12 inches. Anyways, look, if I talk anymore, I'm just going to keep telling you how much I like this subwoofer, so we're going to cut it here. Any questions, ask in the comments below. And until next time, later.